טוב.
Okay, everyone, good evening. So, very nice to see everyone here. It's a very exciting moment for me. This is a project that I've been working on for a long time, and it's just so lovely to see so many people on the screen and to see such a good response. I want to start talking a little bit about the technology so that everyone, we can be sure that they know how it works. So the session this evening is going to be translated simultaneously between English, Spanish, and French. You have on your screen at the bottom the different options, and at the bottom of the screen, one of the things you have is called interpretation. If you click on the button that says interpretation, you'll be given the choice of listening in English or in Spanish or in French. And you have to choose one of those things. If you don't choose any of them, then you won't hear. That's the thing. Sometimes you end up hearing everything at the same time, and sometimes you end up hearing nothing. So it's better to choose one of those choices. Beneath the choice of the language, you have another choice, which is mute original audio. And that you can decide what to do. If you don't click that, you'll hear the original, and you'll also hear the translation into your language. Our suggestion is when someone's giving a lecture or someone's speaking, you should mute the original audio and listen only in your own language, because otherwise it will be very confusing. But when there are questions and answers, or there are conversations, the recommendation is to leave the original audio, not to mute it, so that you can also hear the speaker and also hear the answers. Otherwise, if you only leave the translation without the original, then there's a long time that you'll wait for pauses because you won't hear people speaking until you get to the translations. You can play with it. You can change your language in the middle. If you're an English speaker and you want to practice your French, you can practice French, you can practice Spanish, you can go back and forth between languages, and you can include the original, not include the original, keep playing with it until you get to the settings that you're happiest with. Is everyone okay? If everyone's okay, give me a little wave, because I can't hear you. Okay, that's rule number one. Rule number two is that I've made everyone unmute, because otherwise we're going to get too much disturbance of background noise with over 100 people on our call tonight. So everyone is muted. If you want to ask a question, which we recommend that people ask questions, then what you do is put your question in the chat. Ideally, you can put it in a chat to Tehillah. Tehillah is waving there. Tehillah is from the office of Masorti Olami in Jerusalem, and she's one of the coordinators who works with Masorti Europe. And she's taking care of the technical details of the call this evening. So we'll gather all of the questions together. When we make a stop for questions, we'll invite you to ask your question in public, and then we'll unmute you so that you'll be able to speak to everyone. And that way, we hope that the whole evening will work. So hopefully everything is okay. If you have a problem, again, put it in the chat, because then we'll try to give you some advice and to help you solve your problem. So far, so good. Very good. So now we'll go into the evening itself. the session this evening is the first session in a program that we've been planning for over a year. And that is, it was originally conceived to help the leadership of our movement understand the movement better so that they could better do their job as leaders of the movement. I don't know how many times I've been asked the question, what is Masorti? What does it do? What's special about that synagogue? How do you decide halakha? Where does your money come from? Where do your rabbis come from? Are you Orthodox? Are you Reform? People constantly ask questions, and the people who ask those questions aren't strangers on the street. Usually, the people who ask those questions are leaders of our communities. So we thought that we would put together a program that would address some of the questions that people ask. Then there was the coronavirus and there was the shutdown, and we decided that if we're doing this program and we're doing it online and being able to share everywhere, why don't we open it up and invite as many people as possible? So here we are this evening with over 100 people in the first session. There are 5 parts to the program. The first part is on Masorti Judaism, and there will be 3 sessions in the first part. Tonight we want to talk about the ideology of the Masorti movement. We want to ask that big question, what is Masorti Judaism? We'll hear from 2 of our rabbis. You'll hear from me in the United Kingdom and Rabbi Yeshaya.
Avoir 2 intervenants.
And hopefully there'll be an interesting discussion between us. Each of us will give a 10-minute presentation on what we understand Masorti Judaism to be. And afterwards, hopefully there'll be some questions, there'll be some debates and some discussions, and we'll get to interesting places. Besides that, there'll be 2 more sessions in the unit on Masorti Judaism. The other 2 sessions talk about how the Masorti movement works. The first session asks kind of the mechanics of our institution. Where do our rabbis come from? How do we decide halakha? Who controls who? What are what's the hierarchy in the movement? What are the different institutions? What's the relationship between the different parts of the movement? That's the second session. And the third session will try to give an overview of where our congregations are, where are the kehillot, and how are our kehillot different in different kinds of places. I'm in a lucky position. I travel a lot, or I used to before coronavirus travel a lot. So I know lots of communities, and I know what a Masorti community looks like in Spain, or what it looks like in the United States, or what it looks like in Africa, whether it's South Africa or Uganda. But most of us think that the Masorti movement looks like it does in their own country. And we think that it looks like it does in your own community. And I can tell you that that's not the case. So what we want to do in the third session is introduce you to the range of different communities that are Masorti communities. So those are the 3 sessions on Masorti Judaism, and then there'll be altogether, as I say, 12 sessions. The other units deal with Masorti movement and Israel. It deals with Europe and what's unique about the Masorti movement in Europe. We look at best practices in managing communities, and we look at advice we give for the leadership of communities on how to develop communities and dealing with special kind of problems that arise in the different communities. But all of that is the introduction. And now if it's okay, I want to get into the session this evening itself. So if everyone's heard and there's no problems, I'll move on to the next part. Why don't you give me a wave if you're hearing and everything is okay, so that I have some feedback. That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So the big question this evening is, what is Masorti Judaism? I can tell you that I've been a rabbi in the movement for more than 30 years. And it's a question that I dread. And you hear that question and you just don't know where to start with the answer, because the answer isn't simple. And I've, of course, given a lot of thought to that question. And Masorti Judaism is that Masorti Judaism isn't one thing. It's a very complex construct, a very complex concept, and you always have to guess from which angle or from which place the question is coming from. If I give an example for something similar, being Jewish is also part of a very complex identity. And being Jewish can mean being part of a people. It can be part of a nation. It could be about your religious identity. It could be about your cultural identity. It could be about your ethnic identity. Judaism means a lot of different things to different people. And each Jew perhaps defines themselves with a different combination of those elements. Masorti Judaism, I think, is a question of history, and it's a question of sociology, and it's a question of philosophy, and it's a question of theology. And each of those is a different way of understanding what it is to be a Masorti Jew. And when someone asks me, what is Masorti? I need to ask myself, are they interested in history? Are they interested in sociology? Are they interested in philosophy? And if you don't answer with the right angle, then people don't know what you're talking about. So I want to say, for 2 minutes, I want to say for each of those aspects of Masorti Judaism, and then try to get some kind of overall definition that works for me. And I'm going to do it in that order. I'm going to say something about the history, and something about the sociology, something about the philosophy, and then something about the theology. And I'm going to start with history. From a historical point of view, Masorti Judaism is an approach to the Jewish tradition that emerged in the 19th century. And it was very much connected with the emancipation of the Jews in Europe. Before the emancipation, no one had questions about what it meant to be a Jew. You were told what it meant to be a Jew. You were told where to live, and you were told what kind of work you had to do, and you were told lots of things. You knew your place. When the emancipation came, the Jews were given the opportunity to join the society out there, but together with that opportunity came all kinds of different challenges. And the main thing is that the world out there didn't really have a place for traditional Jews. So that the price for being part of the society was stopping to be a Jew, or stopping to be a traditional Jew. And the Jews responded to that in different ways. One way was that to say, I really want to be part of the big society. And if I need to change my Judaism to be part of society, I will change Judaism to be part of society. And that approach eventually became Reform Judaism. Reform means to change. And Judaism was reformed to make it suit the modern world, to make it suit the big world that the Jews were invited to join. And Reform was the first modern movement in Judaism. There were other Jews who said, I'm not willing to compromise on my Judaism. And if the price for remaining a Jew is to reject the world out there, I'm willing to pay that price. And the people who took that approach eventually became Orthodox Jews. And Orthodoxy was a response to Reform. The third and last modern movement was the conservative or the Masorti approach. And it was made up of people who said, yes, I very much want to be part of the world out there. And yes, I very much want to remain Jewish and have the beautiful parts of our tradition that are so important for us. And we have to find a way to bring those two elements together. We'll change only enough to open the door to the world on the outside, but we'll maintain from our Judaism as much as possible to stop being Jews. And conservative Judaism and Masorti Judaism was a world of compromise. It was a world of tension. And it's never stopped being that. And
Y nunca ha dejado de ser así. Siempre está.
Comment existe jusqu'aujourd'hui? Comment est
That kind of is the way it started in history. And from the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, the movement prospered and grew on the basis of finding the compromise between two value systems that people wanted to belong to. That's history. Now I want to say a word about sociology. The first thing I want to say about sociology is that most of us belittle the sociology. We say we're aware that there's sociology, but we don't think about it that much. And we pretend that the choices that we make are because of our ideology or because of our theology. And we pretend that we are who we are because of our mind and not because of our society. But I think the vast majority of Masorti Jews are Masorti Jews because of sociology and not because of theology. And the sociology is that what Masorti Jews have in common is that it's made up of people who aren't really comfortable in Reform congregations and Reform society because it doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel really Jewish. And at the same time, don't feel comfortable in real Orthodox communities and Orthodox places because frankly, it seems weird and it seems wrong and it seems oppressive. And what draws people to Masorti communities is that it's Orthodox enough to feel authentic and it's Reform enough, i.e., it's true enough to the secular liberal values that most of us share, that we're able to feel comfortable there. And that place where we feel comfortable really defines where most of us want to be and where the reason most of us choose to be in those kind of communities. I'm frequently because of my work in the Beit Din, people come to me when they're thinking of converting to Judaism. And I have lots of conversations with people on the question of which synagogue should I go to? And should I have a Reform conversion? Should I have an Orthodox conversion? Should I have a Masorti conversion? And my advice to people is always, you should go and visit communities. You should go to the communities. You should speak to the people there. You should experience life there. And you look around at the people and ask yourself, are these people the kind of people I want as my friends? And do these people look like the kind of people that I want to be? Is it my aspiration? That test is a sociological test, not a theological test. But as I said, most of us make our choices about sociology. And most of us are Masorti Jews because it feels comfortable to us. A word about philosophy. Philosophy, I think there's a big philosophical discussion that underpins the understanding of Masorti Judaism for a lot of people. And it's a theological discussion, a philosophical discussion about what is the nature of truth. What is true? Because in all the differences between the traditional Jewish world and the big world out there, one of the key differences was the understanding of the place of truth in society. In the traditional Jewish world, you knew what was true. The truth is what it said in the Torah. The truth was revealed on Mount Sinai. And if you wanted to know the truth, you went to the rabbi, or you studied the books, or you studied the Talmud, but you could find the truth in the tradition. In the modern liberal world, we don't believe that anymore. We believe that truth comes from the scientific method. You discover truth by gathering evidence, by weighing that evidence logically, by doing experiments, by putting forward a hypothesis, and then going through some kind of methodology that will arrive to some kind of understanding of the world around us. And those two approaches to truth clash. And the traditional Jewish world cleaved on to the truths that came from the tradition. But to be Masorti is actually to want to be a person who practices the Jewish tradition, but thinks like a modern, liberal, educated, academic person. An open mind, and that again, it's a tension. Do I stick to traditional concepts? Do I open myself to new ways of understanding things? But that tension creates it's a tremendously creative place of trying to re-understand the Jewish tradition and to re-understand it in a way that can be true to us as open-minded thinking people and true to us as part of the long chain of the Jewish tradition and wanting to be true to that tradition. And that tension, very alive, very creative, and really defines philosophically what it means to be a Masorti Jew. And finally, theology. And I'll only say one thing about theology, and hopefully Rabbi Yeshaya will say something else when he gives his approach. But I would say from a theological point of view, Masorti Judaism believes very strongly in the rabbinic concept of Nitna Torah Libnei Adam, that the Torah has been given to people, that we can use our minds, we can use our intellect, we can study the tradition, we can learn the tradition, and through that we can develop the tradition, we can allow it to grow, we can allow it to change, that the possibilities of playing with the tradition are many. And the reason that's so important for us is that to be a Masorti Jew means to live in tension. It's to live in tension between the past, the present, and the future. It's to live in tension between a traditional way to feel that you're two different things and trying to balance it within yourself. It's to be a Jew and it's to be a person. It's to be part of the Jewish society and it's to be part of the society around us. It's constantly to live in tension between two different things. And using our intellect and being true to our tradition, to be a Masorti Jew is to believe that that's possible, and that we do that, we create a social place where most of us come because first and foremost, that's the place that we feel at home. So those are my words of introduction, and thank you very much for your patience in listening to me. And I want to invite my colleague and friend, Rabbi Yeshaya Dalsas from the Dor Vador community in Paris to give his presentation. Rabbi Dalsas will be speaking in French. So now it's really important that the English speakers remember to choose English as their language and not just to listen to the language of speaking. And I'm going to, the chat is available if people have questions to pose their questions, and then we'll go back to the questions in the next part of the evening. But now over to Rabbi Dalsas, and please, I'm going to unmute you, and it's now for you.
Ok, d'abord, je vais essayer de parler un petit peu doucement.
I'm going to try to talk a little bit softly so that the translator can translate. It's not easy to translate simultaneously. I know that many people don't understand French, many of the people who are participating, so I'm going to try to talk slowly as well so you can understand what I'm saying, I hope. First, I want to say that, of course, I agree completely with what Chaim Wiener found to say, and I am certainly not here to disagree with him. It was a great presentation and introduction. I absolutely adopt his version of this tension in which we're living as Masorti Jews between the traditional Jewish world and modernity, the modern ambient society, which we are also active members. But I personally, Yeshaya, came from an Orthodox world before I was Masorti, and I could not personally be a Reformed Jew. And for me, Yeshaya, it corresponds very deeply to something in me. It fits something very deep in me. I could also be a member of the modern Orthodox member, but certainly not Orthodox, strict Orthodox. That's not my world. I have a part of my family that's in that world, but it's not my world. And neither could I be in Reform Judaism. I don't know it very well, but what I know of it, I mean, I respect all these movements, but none of them is for me. And my personal choice is to be a Masorti Jew. So I am going to return to the concept of halacha. So it is a concept that has to do with a priori thinking, what previous, and with a posteriori thinking. So the tension between the a priori and the a posteriori. I think that the question before us as Masorti Jews today is a fundamental question. Do I think things a priori? Do I have presuppositions? Or am I thinking about the future a posteriori? I will take decisions based on an event based on what I think will happen, but for example, I'm going to decide to do a Seder, to hold my Seder on Zoom. This is a new thing, and that is because I have to deal with what's happening now. It was not a presupposition, it was not a given that I would have had a Seder on Zoom until coronavirus and what it opened me up to in my reflections and our needs. So it's important to study, but what does it mean to study the Torah or the law? And what does it mean to enact or live them, to practice the Torah? These are two pillars of Judaism. Talmud Torah, in theory, is the serious study of Torah. It's an obligation, it's a discipline. It's not reading a book about Judaism, even though there's nothing wrong with that. There are great books about Judaism. Reading an introduction to Judaism, or even a book that's more elaborated, like Gershom Shalom, for example, or a book by Abraham Heschel. None of that is Talmud Torah, study of the Torah or study of the laws, even though they're important books and important authors. Talmud Torah is really to study the text. It's strict, it's rigorous. Also, the question of mitzvot, of commandments, of obligations. People like to say, you know, you do a mitzvah, that's to do something great and nice and positive. That's true. But it's also stricter and more rigorous than that. Sometimes a mitzvah that I need to perform is something I don't want to do or I don't like, but I'm obligated. It's a commandment. So personally, I, Yeshaya, want to remind you that there is this world of Judaism that is a world of obligation and exigencies. Talmud Torah, mitzvot, and the obligation to do things based on a prioris and not a posteriores. For example, I'm going to the synagogue today because I have nothing else to do. No, I'm going to the synagogue today because I have to, and in order to do so, I will cancel other things I might have to or want to do. For me, Shaya, the Masorti movement seeks to defend that and to continue that. Judaism as a response to emancipation, but I'd like to nuance that. It's not just a response to the emancipation of the Jews, because that would be a posteriori. The emancipation took place in any case, and there we are reacting. We're trying to make it a little easier. We're trying desperately to hold on to what we can. No. So, okay, we'll do some mitzvot, we'll do some commandments because it's obligatory, but it's no big deal. If that were Masorti Judaism, Yeshaya wouldn't be interested. That's not my Judaism. Now, it may be the Judaism of some of the members of my community. I respect them, but that's not my concept of Masorti Judaism, and that's not what I seek to teach people. For me, Masorti is fundamental. It's an independent Judaism. That means that it itself is free of the social weight of communal institutions, which in the Jewish world can really be censorious and suffocating. Because of the independence of Masorti Judaism, leaders can read and think and write and give speeches as they want to. There's freedom of thought and expression for our leaders in Masorti Judaism without having to render accounts to institutions. And Yeshaya, really appreciate that. It is also a world that encourages active Judaism, active participation. The question is, does this really work or not? But it's what we really encourage. As Chaim said, there are questions of sociology and theology. And when Chaim spoke about truth, not sure what he means by truth really, but we can have an honest conversation about it. We can talk about things as they are. And that's important. It's primary, it's fundamental. I can't stand people who won't speak directly about anything, who are dishonest about what they're talking about, who are indirect. And I think that Masorti Judaism, as a result, is courageous, is brave. The founders of this movement set out the problems and the questions specifically, said things openly. Judaism is huge. You need to read a lot, you need to think a lot, and Masorti Judaism encourages erudition, a lot of learning. And also, as Chaim said, balance. Of course, we're always drawn to...
L'équilibre, c'est la voie du milieu.
Por supuesto, siempre tendremos preferencia sobre un ángulo.
Le sentier en or, le sentier.
It's what we call the golden path. And Masorti movement also takes this road. And in Kabbalah, it would be Tiferet. Also, in the Masorti movement, we don't have a personality cult. Of course, there are big major figures in Masorti, but there is no personality cult. Whereas in the Orthodox movement, Yeshaya have seen, and I see it still today, these personality cults, and they really bother me. So all of these different aspects make an active and dynamic Judaism that is building something solid. But let me go back to my initial question. A priori, a posteriori, sorry. My personal choice of the Masorti movement is a choice from the a priori. That is to say, I believe that I find in this movement, in this vision of Judaism, that a priori is positive. It's not, can't do better. This is the best I can do. I don't know where to go. Oh, look, they'll accept me. Oh, okay, nobody's really going to bother me. Okay, nobody's really going to ask me questions. People will take me as I am. It's because I believe, I think a priori that it is a Judaism I can defend and I can get behind. Okay, we talk a lot about tradition and the past. What was there? The emancipation, the 19th century, what happened, this, that. Okay, we are now in the 21st century. Come on. What interests me is the future. Of course, I'm interested in the past, but I'm interested in the future now. Come on. The difficulty of the future of an active Judaism in an ambient society as it is, and as today's Jewish society is in diaspora or in Israel, and that I'd like to say something about also Israel. So I made my choice as a Masorti Jew in Israel to become a Masorti Jew. I wasn't thinking I would return to diaspora at that time, and it was an Israeli choice. That is to say, I believe that Masorti Judaism is most compatible with democratic modern Jewish society in a Jewish state. I think that Orthodox Judaism is a real problem with the question of the state, and Reform Judaism has no answers to offer for the problems of modern current Jewish society. In Israel, for example. And I think this is something the Masorti movement doesn't talk about enough, but it's a fundamental and primary question for Jews. What are our relations to the state of Israel? What can our, and to any state, what do we do? What are we building? What do we want to build? Okay, so when Chaim was speaking, when Rabbi Chaim Wiener was speaking about the tensions that we live, I agree. And I think we have to be responsible for them. And we have to accept having these tensions. I have a little warning I'd like to emit, nonetheless. I think that the risk for the future of the Masorti movement is to remain a Judaism that pushes individuals beyond what they are. For me, Judaism is a place where I grow and where I grow up and where I mature. It's not just where I stay as I am. The Judaism has to make me, a priori, move, keep moving. But the risk is that it become a Judaism that's, pleasant, easy. I like it. And here, I'm going back a little to what Chaim was saying. It's a synagogue where I get along with people. I myself get along with people, which is good because I'm the rabbi at that synagogue, so it's good I get along with them. But it's true that in terms of Judaism, it's not always where I find myself most comfortable, because not everyone has enough knowledge of the Judaism they're practicing, and as opposed to Orthodoxy, for example. And so I hope that that won't be more and more the case. That's the little danger I want us to be warned about or think about. The Masorti is not just a club of politically correct people. For example, I am really not interested in being politically correct. Everybody who knows me knows this. Really not my thing. If that's the goal of Masorti Judaism, I wouldn't be a member of it. And so I think there's a kind of welcome that we need to avoid. So one of the things that Chaim said, I think is quite important, is to bring our attention to sociology. Most people, if you ask them questions about why they like Masorti, don't answer in the same ways as I just did, Ayeshaya, or as Chaim just did. They're not interested, they're not going to bring up these different aspects. They come there because they feel good there. The rabbi's interesting, or people are nice, and nobody bothers you. It's not about revelation or other practices. And I think that this series of courses that we're going to have, these classes, to address the question of how Masorti defines itself, will be very interesting. I think future leaders and current leaders of this movement need to think about what we're building and how. In Europe, we have a very particular position, very small movement, but we can do a lot in the diverse countries in which we find ourselves. We can have a certain kind of way of speaking, a discourse, and we can have our own place, our own status, our own role to play as Masorti. I think we need to train people and teach them how to think about these questions and about Judaism. Yeah. What are we sowing? Are we sowing for the future? What will flourish? What will blossom? What are we going to harvest? I hope I was pretty clear. Chaim, it's up to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. So, a pleasure to be sitting here amongst friends and with my colleagues. And while we've been speaking, lots of questions have been coming in.
Y mientras hemos estado hablando, muchas
I won't have chance to look at those questions. So I'm going to invite Alexander, was the first question that came through about modern Orthodoxy. So can Alexander, can you please unmute yourself and address your question to all of us? Yes. Alexander, please.
He says he cannot unmute.
I've unmuted him.
Okay, I think it's okay now. You hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
I couldn't unmute myself. Thank you. During your first explanation, you mentioned Orthodoxy kind of refuses.
So they évoqué
vida del mundo.
Modern Orthodoxy, especially also when you look at the religious practice, that in certain cases is very similar to the practice of conservative synagogues. Rabbi Yeshaya made some allusions to that already, but maybe if you like to comment on how you see like the frontier between the two movements there. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's a very important question, and it allows me to clarify my thoughts a little bit more. So the first thing I want to say is when I spoke of the movements, I spoke in ideal types. But the truth is that all of the movements are very wide. So there's not one thing which is Orthodox. Orthodox goes from Hasidic and Neturei Karta and extremely ultra-Orthodox to a very modern kind of Orthodoxy. It's a very wide movement. The Masorti movement is also very wide, more egalitarian, less egalitarian, Shabbat with music, Shabbat without music, relationship to gay marriages. There's lots of differences within the Masorti movement. And even the Reform movement encompasses many, many different shades within it between those who want to be more traditional and those who are less traditional. But still, I think my characterization is typical of those movements. Now, on the very left wing of the Orthodox world, you have a modern Orthodoxy, which is very interesting space now. They're doing lots of interesting things, both intellectually and also in terms of practice, in terms of women's participation. It's one of the most interesting and exciting places in the Jewish world today. And yet, when I ask myself kind of how I would typify that movement, I think I would define them as people who identify with many modern values and ask themselves, how far can we go against the values of the liberal world without compromising our orthodoxy? Right? How low can I make the mechitza? How much can I have women participate without not being challenged as not being Orthodox anymore? Whereas as a Masorti rabbi, I'm also trying to balance things. But I've already gone past the point that it's important for me to be called Orthodox. It's important for me to be true to the Mishnah, to be true to the Talmud, to be true to the Jewish tradition. But I no longer think that Orthodoxy has a monopoly on that. So the need to be Orthodox isn't as great. But also, I want to say one more thing. I want to answer that question as a sociologist, because the answer isn't only theological, it's also sociological. Groups choose certain behaviors to be what we call social marker. It's something that you do or something that you say that shows the world who you are. And that thing becomes almost not negotiable, because if you do it or you don't do it, you're no longer considered part of that group. Now, the social marker for an Orthodox community has become having a mechitza. That wasn't always the case. That wasn't always the case. But today, if you're a community with a mechitza, you're Orthodox. And if you don't have a mechitza, you're not Orthodox. So if you go into many of the kind of very left-wing modern Orthodox communities, you'll find interesting things. The mechitza goes up, the mechitza goes down. We have it for this part of the service, not for that part of the service. And you wonder why all these games. The reason is that the mechitza is a social marker for defining yourself as an Orthodox community. Now, as Orthodoxy becomes more egalitarian, as feminism comes into the left wing of Orthodoxy, I think that what's going to be interesting is I think that the mechitza is going to stop being the social marker of Orthodox communities. And if you would ask me to predict what the new social marker is going to be, my prediction, I could be wrong, but I suspect we're in an age of coronavirus. And in the age of coronavirus, communities have had to invent new ways of doing themselves. There's probably not a Reformed community in the world that doesn't do its services on Shabbat through Zoom or through Facebook or through other online mediums. And there's probably not one Orthodox community in the world that does do their services electronically on Shabbat. They do it on Friday afternoon, they do it on Sunday morning, they do it on Saturday night. Also, lots of interesting, innovative ways to do your community, but it's not going to be on Shabbat. And my guess is that Zoom is going to be the new social marker of, are you really a traditional community or not? And that raises very interesting questions for the Masorti movement, which has always been between Orthodox and Reform and always been pulled in the two different directions. And some people want to and some people don't want to, and some communities do and some communities don't. And if Zoom becomes the new social marker, we as the Masorti Jews will have to once again decide who we are. What is Masorti? Yeshaya, do you want to add something to that?
Je peux ajouter. Bon,
I'd like to add, well, I agree with what you said, Chaim, but personally, this discussion, this controversy doesn't interest me. I couldn't care less about the question of the machitza in the synagogue or Zoom on Shabbat. These are details. They have no great interest. They're of no great interest. In fact, the identity marker or social marker that will characterize a synagogue, oh, I'm going to go to this one because there's a mechitza and it's kosher and that's better. It's okay, the mechitza is very small, it's transparent, but it's okay, there's a mechitza. Or they're using Zoom, it's terrible. Or, oh, they're using Zoom, it's great. For me, this is all idiocies. It doesn't matter, it's stupidity. Doesn't count for me. These are not stakes. This is not what's at stake in Judaism. But I agree with you, Chaim. Members of the public, look at that. That's what people think about. Oh, is he wearing a big kippah? Is he wearing a small kippah? I think none of this is of any interest. I could not care less. Couldn't matter less. But people who are thinking about that and taking that into account are not thinking about Judaism. They have to get more serious. If what counts for us is to know, well, how's the mechitza? Is it like this or that? Or when did they use Zoom? I can only say, oi, God in heaven, is this the Jewish people? We're in trouble. Has no interest. Even if we can discuss every one of these subjects, there are things that are more important and more weighty. As for the mechitza, I'm against it because I really want to liberate women. I want to emancipate women. And that's not because my wife was pressuring me. It's in fact the opposite. She didn't want to be emancipated and liberated and free. But once again, I'm opposed to the mechitza because of what it represents. I think it should be thrown on the floor. I think we should abolish it. I'm against it as a principle, on principle. As for Zoom, I think that the challenge is to teach Jews, to our public, how to live an independent Judaism. For example, I don't use Zoom for Shabbat at this time of coronavirus, but every day in my congregation, there's something, at least, if not two or three things, and we use Zoom, but Shabbat is Shabbat. Maybe I'm deluding myself, but what I hope is that my community will be having Shabbat, will be living Shabbat, will be practicing Shabbat, and doesn't need me, will be freed from the rabbi. And what I'm afraid of is a Judaism in which you always need the rabbi. Without your rabbi, you're lost. for me, if that's how it is, it's a failure. So Zoom, not Zoom, that's not the question. The question is, do you know how to be a Jew? Do you know yourself a Jew? Can you be an autonomous, independent Jew or not?
Thank you. We're coming to the end of our time, but I want to take one more question before we're finished. And the next question was Robert Limbasat. And perhaps if you could, I've unmuted you, and if you could pose your question to the whole community here.
Non, c'était tout à fait une simple question historique à propos des grandes figures.
It's not worth it. It was a historic question on history. I don't know the history of Masorti. I don't know who the founders of the Masorti movement are.
Okay. Okay. The question was about kind of the historical figures. Who should you know about when you think of the Masorti movement? And I want to talk about two people who I think every Masorti Jew should know about. The first one is a man by the name of Zachariah Frankel, or Zachariah Frankel. We have a rabbinical school in Berlin, which is called the Zacharias Frankel College, where we train our Masorti rabbis for Europe. But Zachariah Frankel was a very important figure in the beginnings of our movement. He was a German rabbi. At the time, German Judaism was divided between quite an extreme reform and also an ultra-Orthodox movement. And the mainstream called themselves liberal. They were liberal Jews. And Zachariah Frankel was one of the leaders of that movement. And he taught in a rabbinical seminary in a place called Breslau, which at the time was in Germany. Now it's in Poland. And he had a theology that he called the positive historical approach. It was very interesting. By history, he meant scientific. By history, he meant that you could study history with the tools of historians and not say everything is as it was in the Torah. You were allowed to ask the questions of history. By positive, he meant that most of the academics, particularly in Germany at the time, were very anti-Semitic and sometimes very anti-religion, and science was used to attack religion. And Zachariah Frankel said that science needs to be used to support religion, to understand religion, that you have to have an approach to Judaism he called positive historical, that you'd be positive towards the tradition, but you'd be true to the science, you'd be true to history. And that approach really became the Masorti approach to the tradition. I'll just point out the name of the school was the Jewish Theological Seminary in Breslau, and many other places were modeled after it. So if you heard of the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, which is in many ways the intellectual center of the Masorti movement, it was modeled after the Jewish Theological Seminary in Breslau. But there was also a Jewish Theological Seminary in Budapest, still exists to today, and it was also modeled after Breslau. So it started a movement around Europe of Jews who had this positive historical approach. And the only reason that it didn't continue in Europe and thrive in Europe was the Holocaust. So the approach didn't really survive the Holocaust, and it only really continued in America, where there wasn't a Holocaust, so the approach could take roots. The other person that I think everyone needs to know is a man by the name of Solomon Schechter. Solomon Schechter was actually an archaeologist at Cambridge University. He's very famous because he went to Cairo and found the Geniza. And he didn't really find it. There were other people before, but he had the chutzpah to take it. He went to Cairo. People knew there were things in Cairo. And he asked the people in Cairo, can he take some stuff? And they said, sure, take whatever you want. And he spent 6 months shipping out crates. So he took everything from the Geniza in Cairo, and it went to Cambridge University. But he eventually left Britain, and he went to America. And he became he went to the Jewish Theological Seminary, but he was used to, from England, there was a united synagogue. There was a Jewish community, an official Jewish community. And he turned the theology and he turned the philosophy that you had in the seminary, and he wanted to create a movement. And he founded the United Synagogue of America, this organization. And he was the one who was very instrumental in creating communities, not only places where you studied Torah, but also places where you had synagogues and you had communities, and you trained rabbis for communities, and he turned it into a real movement with institutions. And that was something he brought from England, and he brought to America, and was responsible for creating the United Synagogue in America. And that's the reason they have the same name. In England, the United Synagogue is the mainstream Orthodox, and in America, the United Synagogue is the conservative movement. And the reason is that Solomon Schechter brought it from England, went to America. At the time, they didn't realize it was two different movements. But over time, Orthodoxy became stronger in England, and the United Synagogue in America became more egalitarian and more liberal, and changed in various ways. So that's some of the people that we really don't know what to say. We said we'd go for, yeah, excuse me? Okay. So we said that we would do an hour to an hour and a quarter, and I think that we've done our time this evening. I want to finish thanking my colleague and my friend Rabbi Yeshaya for the first time that we've taught together in this way, and very special. I want to thank everyone who's taken an hour out of their evening and shared it with me on a computer when we're all spending too much time on a computer. And I want to say how wonderful it is just to see our Masorti Jews from countries all across Europe, from Spain in the very west to certainly Prague and maybe even further east. It's just wonderful to see all of us together in the same space. And I want to plug for the next one of these meetings is in 2 weeks' time. And the subject in 2 weeks' time are the institutions of our movement. How do we decide halakha? Who decides who a rabbi is? Who decides what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do? Where does the money come from? All of the big questions. How does the Masorti movement actually work? What are its institutions? And what's its organizational chart? That's the questions we want to look at in 2 weeks' time. And I hope that once again, people will be able to join me. This is the first time that we've tried doing 3 languages at the same time. And this is the first time that rather than saying everyone's going to try to do it in English, that we've respected the fact that we are a European movement, and there are lots of languages and there are lots of countries, and we can all do it together. If anyone has any feedback to us from the technological point of view, from a content point of view, anything that you think we should know, you're invited to put it into the chat now, or you're also invited to send an email to me. You got an email from me with the details of how to log on this evening. So you can respond to that email and give us feedback. We'd be very, very interested in getting your feedback so that we can improve and so that we can do it better. So the next session is in 2 weeks' time, also on a Tuesday night at the same time. And the login details are going to be exactly the same. I'll send a reminder and you'll get the login details again, but they'll be the same as this time. So if you don't get it, you'll know how to be in touch with us. So I'll just finish by saying good evening to everyone. I'm going to unmute everyone so you have a chance to say words to each other, and I'll turn off the meeting.
Il faut dire, Chaim, c'est difficile.
Chaim, it's difficult. It's not easy to be a Masorti Jew. Merci, merci. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot.
C'est super. Laila Tov.
Thank you.
Bon.